Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Hope you all enjoyed a wonderful dinner catered by Junebug Catering. Let's give them a round of applause. Welcome to the closing event of the symposium organized by the Charles M. Russell Center for the Study of Art of the American West here in the School of Visual Art at OU. I'm Emily Burns, the director of that center and an associate professor of art history. I want to welcome you and also tell you about the wonderful funders that have enabled this evening's event to take place. This lecture by Angeline Boulley is funded by the Terra Foundation for American Art, which enabled this invitation. And we also got some support from the OU School or Department of Women and Gender Studies, which paid for our dinner tonight. Thank you so much. And their funds also enabled us to invite some Native American colleagues from out of town to come and stay here to attend these events. So thank you so much for that collaboration. I just have two more notes before I introduce my colleague who will introduce our guest speaker. The bookstore from Oklahoma City, Full Circle, is supporting this event. So if you're interested to buy books by Angeline Boulley or by other people involved in our conference, Beth Piatot and Madeline Sayet, who are also both here this evening, and Elizabeth Hutchinson, please do take advantage, and he's seated out in the hallway outside. The event will be followed by a book signing in a classroom down the hall, so do get a chance to pick up your books if you haven't already. And then the last thing I wanted to note is that the student group Indigenous Art Forms are here with beadwork, so do visit them while you're here as well. Thanks. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague in art history, Dr. Alicia Harris, who is an assistant professor of art history focusing on Native American art, who will introduce our speaker tonight. Thanks.
Hello again. Kdayadu Daya, Dayawachim Nagach again. Hudeshana Nakoda, Jemacha, Chaje Mitawa Alicia Harris, Wia Itancha Je Makyapi. I realized the last time I introduced myself, I didn't interpret that into English, so I'll do it now. Good evening. It's wonderful to see you all, and thank you once again for joining us tonight. I am a Assiniboine from the Fort Peck Assiniboine and Sioux tribes in northeastern Montana. My name is Alicia Harris, as Emily graciously introduced. Thank you for that. I have a really distinctive pleasure this evening. So Angeline Boulley is an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, is a storyteller who writes about her Ojibwe community in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. She's a former director of the Office of Indian Education at the United States Department of Education. Boulley lives in Southwest Michigan, but her home will always be on Sugar Island. We learn about Sugar Island in her books. During her childhood, she struggled with her biracial Indigenous identity, as so many of us do, searching for representation through the stories and books she read. She realized that the examples she found lacked depth and true experience, and in her mid-40s, she realized that she could write her own experience into existence. What a beautiful story. Firekeeper's Daughter, her first book, her debut novel, was an instant #1 New York Times bestseller. The book has been named the Walter Dean Myers Award for Outstanding Children's Literature, received the Prince Award, the William C. Morris Award for Young Adult Debut Literature, and was an American Indian Youth Literature Award honor book. Called Indigenous Nancy Drew, the central character, I didn't say that, I didn't invent that, but I love it. The central character, Donis, is a Native teen who must root out the corruption in her community after witnessing a shocking murder. The book was recently released in paperback and I understand is available in the hall. Her second novel, Warrior Girl Unearthed, was published in 2023 and was an instant New York Times and Indies bestseller. The novel takes us back to Sugar Island, to Donis's nieces, who are the main characters in a high-stakes thriller about the power of discovering your stolen history. Resonant with the themes in this symposium that we've learned so much from today, in Warrior Girl Unearthed, Perry Firekeeper Birch learns about NAGPRA regulations and limitations as a summer intern in the Tribal Museum. She repeatedly encounters belongings in various contexts throughout the book, including a compelling narrative about a basket made by a beloved grandmother in a gift shop, a collection of human teeth in a university professor's office. That scene is hard to read. And at its most distressing, human remains in a private collection of a local businessman. Her engagements with the material forms point her to her recognition of them as relatives and kin. I won't spoil the story for you, but I will say that Angeline writes brave, smart, and resourceful girls who are motivated by culture and love of community, including those that might be called inanimate under settler paradigms. Her third novel, I'm delighted to report, Stories in the Wind, it will be coming out in September. So excited for that. On a personal note, I would like to share that I'm pleased that you could join us today, Angeline. I suggested bringing you to Dr. Burns early in the fall, I want to say, the fall of this last year, after I had completed reading your second book. My husband and I spend a lot of time driving in far western Oklahoma to visit his family on Cheyenne tribal lands and to northern Montana to visit my family. We spend a lot of time in the car. We travel to northeastern Montana to attend ceremonies on the Fort Peck Reservation where I am enrolled, and we have a tradition in those long car rides of reading aloud to each other during those long car rides, and your books have become prominent positions in our rotation. We loved the companionship of your thoughtfully crafted characters who fondly reminded us of many of our friends, our family, our aunties, our nieces, ourselves. Their struggles resonated with me personally deeply as these stories brought us laughs, they made us cry a few times, and offered us space to think more profoundly about what it means to carry responsibilities and relationships for our community. Please join me in welcoming Angeline Boulley.
I basically rewrote my speech while I was sitting here because I realized there were some other readings that were really appropriate for today's audience. Let's see. Buju Anin, Angeline Boulley, Miskwa Makokwe Nadishnakas, Makwa Dodam, Bawating, Zisabaka Minising, and Donjaba. Chimagwech. Hello, everyone. I'm Angeline Boulley. I'm Bear Clan, and I'm from Sault Ste. Marie and Sugar Island, the place of the rapids. And it's really my honor to be here with this incredible symposium that I have been. It's been an honor to sit in the audience and to hear from so many people. This is a great audience. None of my presentations would be complete without a reference to either Abbott Elementary, Schitt's Creek, or The Office. All right, we're going to use The Office. So there's an inappropriate watermark that gets added to a shipment of boxes of paper. And Michael Scott, the office manager, wants to alert the press about this. And here's the headline. Here's your headline, he says. Scranton Paper Company, Dunder Mifflin, apologizes to valued client. Some companies still know how business is done. In that spirit, my talk tonight is Belonging in Young Adult Literature, Warrior Girl Unearthed, and reclaiming ownership of Indigenous bodies, past and present, AKA, we are not your girl, Professor. I'm all about a pitch. So yes, my debut book was pitched as Indigenous Nancy Drew meets 21 Jump Street. My second book I pitched as Indigenous Lara Croft, but instead of raiding tombs, she's raiding museums and private collections to retrieve ancestral remains and sacred items. But she's 16 years old, and none of her heists go the way that she plans. So while I knew I was going to have to write a second book, and I wasn't quite sure what, I was living and working in Washington, D.C., where I was the director for the Office of Indian Education at the U.S. Department of Education. And I was out for a Sunday walk, and all of a sudden this character's voice popped into my head, and she said, "I stole everything they think I did, and even stuff they don't know about yet." And I thought, who is this force of nature? Well, on my Sunday walk, I only had my iPhone, my house key, and my driver's license and a credit card tucked into the high pocket. So I go into the nearest business, which happened to be a deli restaurant bar, run up to the bartender, and I said, "Could I please have a pen and a piece of paper and a Chardonnay?" And I began writing everything that Perry Firekeeper Birch wanted to tell me that day. So I'm going to do some readings, and I really could have used that Chardonnay before this because I am just shaking nervous. So please, the narrator for both of my books is Isabella Starr LeBlanc, who is a stage actor. Firekeeper's Daughter was her very first audio narration. She was phenomenal. She's since narrated several other books, and we were able to get her back for Warrior Girl, and I can hear a difference. Her flow, her command of the language, her confidence. As spectacular as she was in her debut, she's even better with Warrior Girl. I always recommend that people, buy my book, but also really download an audio of it if you can. And that's not just because I get 12% on my hardcovers and 25% on downloads, but that's a different discussion. That's a different presentation. So Perry Firekeeper Birch is this 16-year-old girl. All that she wanted to do was to have a summer of slack. She was not like her twin sister Pauline, who was so eager to be selected as one of the interns in her tribe's summer internship program. But Perry wrecks the Jeep that she and her sister share, and our Auntie Donis makes her take the very last opening in the internship program at the Tribal Museum, working for this guy who's called Kooky Cooper Turtle. Each week, I begin with an epigraph. Here's the one for week 1. When questioned by an anthropologist on what the Indians called America before the white man came, an Indian simply said, "Ours." That's from Vine Deloria Jr. in Custer Died for Your Sins, an Indian Manifesto. So the first reading is going to be, week 2. You have significantly more deceased Native people in boxes on your campus than the number of live Native students that you allow to attend your institution. That is a February 2021 letter that Shannon O'Loughlin from the Association on American Indian Affairs wrote to Lawrence Bacow, president of Harvard University. Cooper takes his reluctant intern, his repatriation Padawan, to the fictional Mackinac State College, where they are meeting with the college people for a negotiation meeting for a repatriation. Perry's bored, and so she sits during this 2-hour meeting and reads the legislation for the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. The meeting concludes an hour later. I have no idea what, if anything, was accomplished. I follow Cooper so he can hit the road, but he walks with everyone else to the college museum across the quad. A third of the group fills an elevator. Another group fills the second. Cooper takes me aside while we wait for the elevator to return. He digs into his sport coat pocket and retrieves a small perfume bottle. As he uncaps it, the scent of Gijik reaches my nostrils. Cooper demonstrates applying the rollerball applicator to each side of his temples. Then he offers the cedar oil to me. "So you read all about NAGPRA," he says, more a fact than a question. "Yeah, seems straightforward. Inventory the collection, notify the tribes. Then the tribes request the items, and the university or whoever returns the stuff back to the tribes." I finish applying cedar oil and hand the bottle back. I'm not exactly sure why we are protecting ourselves, but I do know that Cooper Turtle wouldn't mess around with our medicines without a good reason. "The stuff?" He raises an eyebrow. "Well, I meant the funerary objects, sacred items, and items of cultural patrimony." I say, feeling proud at having remembered these terms. "And the human remains," he says, motioning for me to enter the elevator first. I'm surprised when we reach the basement. I thought we were going to tour the exhibits on the main floor and the second level. The door ahead is labeled Archives. "What year was NAGPRA passed?" Cooper continues his pop quiz. 1990, I answer, again, pleased with myself. "Do you remember how long museums were given to complete their inventories of human remains and associated funerary objects?" This answer I'm not as sure about. 3 years? 5, he corrects. But if the institution makes a good faith effort, they can request an extension. The law was passed in 1990. It's 2014 now. That's 24 years for public museums and universities to inventory their collections, notify tribes, and process the requests for the return of human remains and, he uses air quotes, stuff. I feel embarrassed for having used a casual word in my summary of NAGPRA. Now ask me how many ancestors this museum has agreed to return to our tribe. He doesn't wait to respond, not that I was going to. Cooper's eyes are flickering with something grievous and combustible. The answer is none, Perry. Not a single ancestor has been returned. With that, he leads me into a storage room with the other tour participants. The museum staff distributes paper booties and thin white gloves. Dr. Fenton, the dismissive lady from lunch, pulls out a long, flat drawer for us to peer inside. I expect to see maps or drawings. Instead, there's cardboard boxes labeled with catalog numbers and descriptions. The first one reads Crania. Crania? As in cranium? That's the board game my sister tries to get me to play. I think it means brains. I step back horrified. Seeing Cooper across the room, I rush to his side. "Cooper, I don't want to be here." "Is it your moon time?" He sounds alarmed. "I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner." "No, it's not that," I whisper. "Are they storing brains? Is that what cranium means?" Crania is plural for cranium, which means the part of the skull that covers the brain. Plural skulls. How many of our ancestors are here? I don't bother to whisper, and neither does Cooper. The inventory is not complete, but there are 13 from Sugar Island and 4 from Nebish Island. There's also one ancestor whose origins have not been ascertained. Before you go, I'd like you to meet her. That's all I ask of you today, but it's up to you. My supervisor looks intense. This request means something to him. I'm going to disappoint him when I quit later today. Just one? I ask. Cooper nods vigorously. He leads me to a guy in a suit and a bow tie. It looks like the fussy Monopoly dude, except he's younger and his hair is red instead of white. All that's missing is his top hat and cane. Cooper shakes his hand and calls him Dr. Leroy. Mr. Turtle, it's good to see you again. Back to see my girl? Cooper's jaw clenches an instant before replying. Yes, please. But first, Miss Birch, he holds out a white-gloved hand. It's fair, Mr. Birch. It turns out to be or rather, craniums, long sturdy leg bones alongside fragments of slender ones that might be from an arm. A thick curved section that I realize is part of a spine. There are small tissue wrap packets. I glimpse at the labels, teeth, and left hand, and AFO. This was a term human remains at least 100 times today, but it registers differently now. The remains of a human being who lived and breathed. Perry, it's my honor to introduce you to Warrior Girl, Leroy says proudly. Now, remains are generally disarticulated, but we made an exception for her. Disarticulated? I pronounce each syllable of the unfamiliar word. Cooper answers before Leroy can. The bones are separated and stored by body parts, not by individual. His voice is calm, but his eyes sear through me like a laser. I force myself to focus on what Leroy is saying. She was in her early to mid-teens, post-puberty, but her hips indicate that she had never been pregnant or carried a child beyond the first trimester. And see this? He points to a gnarled line along her thigh bone. She sustained a major injury from a knife, even larger than her own AFO. We know it was a knife because animal claws would have left parallel lines. AFO means associated funerary object, Cooper says, reading my mind. Her knife was a significant possession to her if she was intentionally buried with it. When the tip of Leroy's white glove touches the bone at the mark, I fight the urge to smack his hand away. He continues speaking in a voice like a teacher conducting class. This is called knitting. It's a pattern the bone makes when repairing itself. This tells us she didn't die from this injury. He points to a vertical gash involving 2 ribs. There is no knitting. She most likely died from this wound. Her knife is an 8-inch flint blade that must have been lashed to a deer antler handle. I reach for it without thinking. Dr. Leroy, may my intern hold the blade? Cooper asks. My gloved hands are open before the yes reaches my ears. The museum guy slides the flint blade into the notched handle before handing it to me. Resting in my palm, the flint is heavier than I thought. Substantial would be the right word. I wrap my fingers around the handle. It's a good weapon. It fits me. I'm filled with an urge to steal, to run as fast as I can with the treasure. I turn the knife handle before gently placing it on Leroy's open palm. I don't want to steal the knife. It belongs to the Warrior Girl. I want to steal her. I'm often asked how I knew education director for my tribe, as many things, as this often happens, people who are productive in their jobs and accomplish a lot get more responsibilities added, though not necessarily more pay. So I also oversaw our tribal cultural department. And we had individuals that did repatriations. And in fact, we knew that there was one of our ancestors in Germany at the Karl May Museum. And I don't know if you know this, but German people are fascinated by Native Americans. And they do these red-faced powwows. And there was this author named Karl May, and he wrote these books that a lot of people love. And, you know, about a character called Veneto. And he's the stereotyped Indian guy. And I was invited to Berlin to an international literary festival, and I was invited to give the keynote. I really wanted to rip into Karl May, but what I did is I gave my talk about how our childhood favorite books, that when we revisit them with adult eyes, it's okay to have the nostalgia, but to now put it into context, and when we know better, we do better. And so I talked about the Little House on the Prairie series by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And that Ma Ingalls' fear of Indians reads different when you realize that Pa Ingalls was squatting on, I believe it was Osage land, and they would come to their house to collect rent, and terrified Ma Ingalls. My speech was then translated into German and printed on the front page of a newspaper the next day, and I just was hoping that someone read it and thought, hey, anyway, we had to, you know, you just kind of keep chipping away at that glacier, and someday you're going to hit the right angle and the right person, and it's just, yeah, things will change. We made nice with the people at the Karl May Museum for 10 years. We played their dog and pony show. We sent over a dance and drum troupe for their red-faced powwow. We did what we needed to do, and we did get that ancestor back. Warrior Girl is based on an actual ancestor. She was taken from Aranac County in Michigan. The collector did not allow, he allowed Warrior Girl, the human remains, to be given to the tribe, but he did not allow the flint blade. And so when the Saginaw Chippewa tribe in Michigan, when they went to do their ceremony and returning her to the earth, their Ogichida society, their warrior society, made her a flint blade that she could be buried with. So she has been repatriated. Okay. Another reading. So Cooper assigns different things to Perry. One of them is he wants her to go on eBay, create a profile, and he wants her to identify 5 items that are Anishinaabe. And she does this. Dozens of items, vests, bandolier bags, and belts are listed. Many are beaded in the familiar Anishinaabe floral style.
An antique vintage Native American beaded vest, Ojibwe Cree Métis, is listed for $2,750 or best offer. 21 people are watching the listing. I zoom in on the pictures. It isn't a full vest, but rather two mirrored front panels edged in pale tan hide. The beadwork is a beautiful example of Anishinaabe floral art. Scrolled vine on one side of the vest, mirrored on the other half. Vibrant flowers and berries against a backdrop of white beads. Some of the tiny glass beads are missing. The edging is worn. Loose threads are visible. The description states early 1900s. This was someone's vest that they wore to special events, maybe even to ceremonies. Cooper taught me that provenance means ownership, the ownership history. Under this, the seller listed that the ownership history was not available. How might a true history of the vest read, I wondered. Provenance. This exquisite vest was created for the Magizi clan Ogama when he traveled with other Eagle clan leaders representing their Anishinaabe bands. His daughter drew the design that she, her mother, aunties, and grandmothers took turns beading. They kissed him when he left for a gathering. He never returned, having been killed in a town near the gathering. From there, the vest was sold to a wealthy woman who thought Indians were beautiful people, more intelligent than society believed. On her deathbed, she willed it to her granddaughter. But the granddaughter had dated an Indian guy once, and he wasn't all as great as all the stories her grandmother had told her growing up. He didn't ride a horse or play a flute. He worked in a factory and had good days and bad days, same as any other guy. She sold the vest to a collector, but didn't want her grandmother's name connected in case any relatives took her to task for selling it. Side note, with the vest money, she traveled to Woodstock and saw Santana, Janis Joplin, and The Who perform. Drenched and hungover, she left before Jimi Hendrix took the stage, but would go on to tell her grandchildren that his performance changed her life. The collector's family lore included a grandma with high cheekbones who was an Indian princess. When he died, his widow held a garage sale a month later to get rid of all his junk. The vest sold to a savvy buyer who hid it in a box of clothing and offered $100 for the lot. When Dances with Wolves came out, the savvy buyer sold the vest for 10 times what he'd paid. The most recent buyer eventually relisted it on eBay after his 23andMe ancestry results showed no connection to indigenous populations. Shit, maybe my twin was right. I am a negative person. Perry was the most delightful character I've ever written, and I think this comedian, it only happened this one time. I keep, praying that the muse will use it again and do the same thing, but no. Perry was this lightning in a bottle, and because the topic of repatriations is so heavy, she was the perfect narrator for the story because she is like who I wished I could have been at 16. She's, badass. She says what's on her mind. And consequences, she doesn't think about consequences. And just that immediate sense of right and wrong and justice. So she was really a pleasure to write. Okay. Thank you for being patient. Week 3. Wait, let me make sure that was the one I wanted to do. Nope. Sorry about that. Okay. Perry takes this boy, Eric. They realize that one of the items that's been listed is by a local seller. And it's this guy who owns this souvenir shop called Teepees and Trinkets. So they drive to St. Ignace to go see it, and there actually is a store that, wait, this is, okay. No, it's completely made up, and events and persons in the story bear no resemblance. You have got to be kidding me, Eric says, as we approach teepees and trinkets. A literal teepee, 20 feet tall, painted structure, is between the parking lot and the road. Next to it, there are life-size paintings of cartoon Indians with faces cut out so tourists can stand behind and peer through the oval openings for a photo opportunity. More like stereotypes and souvenirs, I comment. Eric snorts a laugh. His round cheeks go red. I poke one side with my finger. So pretty, I tease. Like ripe crab apples. You really have no filter, do you? Eric says, still blushing. Eric points to items he finds especially ridiculous. Headdresses with brightly colored feathers. A bow and arrow set with the structural integrity of a toothpick. And a feathered mandala depicting a busty native woman in a buckskin bikini. We pause at a tall, square display cabinet that brackets the doorway to the museum room. A thick layer of dust adds an antique patina to the items inside. Each glass shelf has a folded index card stating, "Not for sale." "Look at this, Eric. They've got a ceremonial pipe," I say. "Holy, it's not supposed to be assembled outside a ceremony." I squat to see what they've got on the lower shelves. Eric calls out the contents of the shelf of the display that he's looking at. I see a basket shaped like a strawberry and a bunch of arrowheads. The last thing he says sounds far away. I can feel my chest tighten. Eric pats my shoulder like he did to the cigar store Indian. "Hey, Perry, what's the matter?" I sit with my knees pulled up to my chest, forcing myself to expand the shallow breaths into deeper, calming ones. My hands are cupped over my mouth. I can't take my eyes away from the woven basket no bigger than a coffee cup. 3 rows of the black ash splints are twisted to form curls around the basket. I feel for his arm when he sits next to me. I think that's my great-grandma's basket. My muffled voice is barely audible. Since it's on the next to the lowest shelf, I lie down to view the bottom of the basket. It's hers, Mariah Paquette, 1940. She drew a raspberry. My great-grandmother finished the basket in July. Miss Golmi, Jesus is the raspberry moon. "Do you want to see if you can hold it?" Eric asks. "No," I say sharply. "The more they know, the more valuable it becomes." I rise quickly, not wanting to draw any attention to myself. Having been followed around stores too often in my life, I scan for security cameras and any lingering gazes of the workers. One dark dome is mounted above the checkout counter. There isn't anything in the corners of the room. The windows have no unusual hardware or wires. It's a dinky, unsophisticated store. Would I take the basket if I could? Absolutely, it should be with my family. Eric and I tour the museum, which consists of a skewed history of the area. Jesuit priests saving us pagan heathens. Psht, as if they wouldn't have starved without our help. I mean, truly, who saved who? We approach a row of moccasins at eye level behind glass. Toddler size at one end, 2 pairs of adult moccasins at the other, and a variety of sizes in between. A family's deer hide moccasins on display. "Whoa," Eric comments. "Every age, every size." I know why Mom and Pops never brought me here. A sign says the moccasins belong to an entire family who died together, were buried somewhere local, and excavated in 1976. The family was an Indian brave and his Indian maiden and their children. There's no mention of their remains. I tell Eric, these moccasins were taken off of ancestors in their graves. He looks horror-struck. I take deep breaths before continuing. There's so much crammed into this space. I could spend an entire day cataloging this inventory and not make a dent. Instead, everything in my body screams to get the hell out of there before they put me in a glass case marked Indian Maiden circa 2014. Because what's the difference between one set of Indian bones and another? Just years on a label, really. I have to get out of here, I say, voice shaking with rage, horror, and panic. On my way out of the room, 3 little boys circle me. They whoop and holler on toy horses. For an instant, I'm transported into a bad Western. Wait, are there any good Westerns? Why do these wannabe cowboys assume they're the heroes? One boy plows into me. It must have been on purpose, because how could he not see me? He bounces off my unyielding body and into the display case. The glass tower tilts in slow motion. Contents shift sideways as it falls. Glass shatters upon impact. The boy lands in its destruction. He cries. His outstretched palm is bleeding. Hey, it's okay. It's a small cut. You'll be okay, I say, squatting down to comfort him. His eyes are big and green. Tears make the lashes stick together. Maybe someday he'll woo the world with them eyes. But right now he's a pissant hellion creating havoc in a store after his ma's told him a dozen times to settle down. My great-grandmother's basket is next to him. Then it's in the pocket of my hoodie as I help the boy rise. I leave the store with Eric as the boy's mom demands to speak with the manager. This is the epigraph to another chapter. And this is Joe Somick and Shannon Martin. This is remarks from the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe to the University of Michigan Board of Regents in 2008. Our ancestors' body and funerary objects have been written on with markers and pens, handled and studied by professors, researchers, and students for far too long. Their bodies laid out in cardboard boxes on metal shelves is your university's shameful reminder of the disrespect for human dignity. We ask, would you want your grandmothers and grandfathers to be treated in this way? U of M had a reputation for being one of the worst institutions to comply with the law. We, Saginaw Chippewa Tribe, had received numerous grants to work with elders and document indigenous knowledge about how the ancestors that they were trying to repatriate from U of M, documenting indigenous knowledge that they belong to that area. And their NAGPRA person at the U of M refuted everything. He did not believe that any ancestor any human remains older than 1,000 years could not be traced to any modern day tribe. After decades of getting this runaround, Joe Somick had 5 minutes to address the Board of Regents at the U of M. With his powerful words, one regent listened, and it made the hugest difference. The university immediately changed the way that they handled repatriations, and they have now become the gold standard of how things can be. The power of one voice, maybe it's just, that glacier hitting that with the ice pick, that's what happened that day. So this reading is, Cooper has Perry do a bunch of readings. and he likes to discuss them with her. So Cooper wants to discuss my weekly reading assignment, Repatriation Reader. Well, what did you think of the 12 categories of viewpoints Dr. Mahisua describes in the introduction? He begins. 11 viewpoints too many, I say. He chuckles. It's not his asthma wheezing. But I'll take what I can get. Seriously, I continue, stealing our bones is wrong. Always was, always will be. The only point of view that matters is the one by those of us who want our ancestors back. I don't disagree with you, he says, rubbing his chin. But knowledge is power, especially during negotiations. We need to know their perspective and be fluent in their language. I'm a fan of five-fingered negotiations, I say, imitating a punch. Cooper's smile does not reach his eyes. You'd never be part of another reclamation, Perry, he admonishes. You'd set back any efforts to bring our ancestors home. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. What if it costs them? I ask Cooper. Who them? He says. The grave robbers and wannabe Indiana Joneses, the scientists and museum people. What if it cost them something? One of their ancestors for one of ours. He thinks about it for longer than I expect him to. What would we gain by that? He finally says. It would be an equal and opposite reaction. My voice rises. The knowledge they claim is so important, would it be worth giving up their own great-great-grandparents' bones? Is there any justification for using bones as currency? No, I say sullenly, but they took from us and all it cost them was tuition. His patience frustrates me. I'd rather he yell or tell me I'm a goofball. Instead, he continues to rub non-existent chin hairs. Remember Dr. Fenton? He finally says. Raquel the hoarder? At least that gets a hee-hee out of Cooper. Dr. Fenton wants to sit next to you at lunch today. Why? I wrinkle my nose as if my dog did a nasty booget. Cooper shrugs. Maybe she's gathering information about us for negotiations. This brings up something that has bothered me since we visited her office. Cooper, why did you tell Dr. Fenton about the otter medicine bag? It's in the Mishomis book by Eddie Benton Benet, he says, with another shrug. Any basic literature review or Google search would have found it. It didn't cost us anything to part with the information, but it fostered the spirit of negotiation. I suppose, I say, unconvinced. But speaking of books, can you give me a list of everything you want me to read this summer? I want to buy my own copies and write in them. Cooper shudders. You write in books? Psst, how else am I supposed to make notes about the reading? Maybe a notebook or perhaps a leather portfolio? He gave her one earlier. Now, what do you say about forging a connection with Dr. Fenton? Well, boss, I'm on the clock, so I'll do whatever you assign. He regards me. Why not do the right thing for the right reason? Does it matter if the outcome is the same? I ask. I think so, Perry Padawan, he says. I think intention matters. I'm like, I have so many more readings that I want to share with you. I do want to share this one about baskets. So Perry's on this, the interns have to divide into teams, and she's on a team with Team Misfit Toys. And they're doing a community service learning project. After we finish eating, the other misfits and I interview elders about black ash baskets. I am surprised to learn that not every story is uplifting. My great-grandmother wasn't the only niche person who had a Jaganash seek an unfair deal on baskets. Minnie tells me about a Jaganash lady who brought over a pot of soup when Minnie's grandmother was sick. She expected the ill woman to sign over a portion of her land in exchange for the soup, but settled for a basket. Half the elders remember parents and grandparents making black ash baskets, and the other half don't remember, because they were taken away and placed in boarding schools. I've known about boarding schools since I was a kid. Whether the school was government-run or church-run, the stripping away of Ojibwe culture was the same. Unable to return home unless parents received permission, parents had to pay for the round-trip transportation and were threatened with loss of future visits if children were delayed. I never thought about the connection between baskets and boarding schools, but listening to story after story today, I realize it's obvious. Children weren't home to learn basket making, beadwork, wood carving, porcupine quill art from their families, or to gain subsistence skills like fishing, hunting, and trapping. The activities our families relied on for survival and to make a living, these traditional Anishinaabe ways of being and expressing our culture through art and storytelling, they weren't passed on as they had been for previous generations. I say a silent prayer of thanks to my parents for teaching Pauline and me. They also taught Lucas. I never thought about how important our cultural camps are for citizens like Eric, who wouldn't have any other way of learning these ways. I'm getting short on time, and there are so many more things that I would have liked to share, readings that I would have liked to do. I will say, there is another epigraph that I am compelled to read, because when I read it, it sickened me. I'm trying. There is a strong convergence between the end of the Indian Wars in 1890 and the development of the tourist and ethnic arts market. It was not just pottery and curios that collectors were after, but Indian skulls, bones, scalps, and sometimes whole heads and bodies. Many of the remains of the Cheyenne men, women, and children slaughtered at the Colorado Sand Creek Massacre of 1864 were sent to the Army Medical Museum. Other remains from this massacre, such as scalps and women's pubic hair, were strung across the stage of the Denver Opera House. And that's from Grave Injustice, a book edited by Kathleen Fine Dare. It is most unpleasant work to steal bones from a grave, but what is the use? Someone has to do it. And that's by Franz Boas, the father of American anthropology, in 1888. Susan Schoen Harjo wrote in 1995, "The crania were harvested from massacre sites, battlefields, prisons, schools, burial grounds, even from hours-old graves. One officer reported waiting until cover of darkness and departure of the grieving family before he exhumed the body and decapitated the skull." In addition to the repatriation, women are going missing in Perry's community. And in the end, she's also taken. She doesn't see her captor won't speak to her, and she can't see his face. "Hey, creeper," I begin, "you get off on Native women?" The flashlight would have blinded me if I hadn't shielded my eyes. "What happened? Some Nishkwe reject your beta ass and now you want to make us all pay? You're a sicko." He shifts with the movement. The flashlight goes haywire. "Better hang on to that. After all, who are you without your big light stick?" "Yeah, I got your number. Let me guess. She rejected your whiny Jaganash ass and started you on this path. Now the only way you can get off is to throw us down in this hole, so we got to deal with you on your terms. Collect and observe. Is that how you want us? Helpless specimens to fuel your God complex? Something clicks in my mind. Collect and observe. The Wendigo's ego grew bigger with each nishkwe he collected and observed. We fascinate him, whether we are alive or dead. He thinks of us as his treasures. Back to see my girl. We were yours, Dr. Leroy. I'm so proud of you, Perry, he finally says. Why take me? It was a chance encounter. I planned on your sister being my last tribute next summer. I've heard so much about her. People say your sister is the best of Sugar Island. I've heard the same thing for years, but hearing something over and over doesn't make it true. Hearing and listening are different. I listen to my heart. She's not the best of Sugar Island, I say. I am. My, who has the God complex now? I am every good thing about Zisibaka menacing. I grew up drinking her spring water. I took my first steps on her back. I run and play and hunt and fish with her. I live in a home filled with love and Anishinaabe, Mino Bamadswin, our good way of life. I speak the same language as my grandmother's grandmother. I am blessed. I am brave. I am intelligent. I am my ancestors' greatest wish. My voice is triumphant. And I am Ogada. I am Ogichida Kwezan. I am the warrior girl who figured you out. In closing, I dedicated my book to the 108,638 ancestors still remaining in collections as of 2020 when I did my author's note. After 30 years of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, there were still, that number represented more than half. After 30 years, less than half of the ancestors had been repatriated home, and more than half were still waiting. My book came out in May of 2023, and also right around that time, the Congress passed, there was a rulemaking and there were new regulations for how repatriation is supposed to be done that is to fulfill the spirit, the intent of the law. In those 3 years since my book came out, along with the regulations, 20,000 ancestors have been returned. Stories are good medicine. They're powerful. If they weren't, people wouldn't try to ban them. Thanks. I will stay until the last person. If you want me to sign a book, I'm happy to do it. If you have a question for me, I'm happy to answer it at that time too. Maybe we can just take one or two questions right now. Since this is a university, I do have to say, please make sure it is a question and not a comment. I do appreciate your observations, but what question can I answer?
Now I think it's on. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Gracie Ann Bennett, citizen of Cherokee Nation. I'm a Bachelor of Fine Arts student, and I was wondering how your cover was chosen, if you chose that, and how it informed your story.
That's a great question. So the artist for my first book, that was his first and last cover. I think some creatives don't like it's a whole process working with a publisher. So the artist for my second book is Michaela Goad, and she's Alaska Native, and it was right after she had won the Caldecott Award, which is the highest, it's like the Academy Award for children's book illustrators, and she's the first Indigenous person to win that. So Macmillan, my publisher, was extremely happy to have her work on that cover. It came about in just, one of my favorite parts is her hair tumbles around and then it becomes like the river because she loves fishing, and the lunar cycles play a part in the story, and there are 13 maple leaves. Sugar Island is named after the sugar maples on the island that we would tap and still do. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful cover. I love how striking it is. For the paperback of Warrior Girl Unearthed will be coming out in May. It has a new cover by an Ojibwe artist, Emily Kiwashigig, and she's also going to be the cover artist for my third book, Sisters in the Wind, which will be out in September, and pre-orders are open. So,
Thank you.
maybe one more. Caroline, we got one more for you.
My question relates to your last statement about banned books. I was a children's and young adult librarian, and I have experienced requests for removal, and I wondered what your experience has been with your titles.
My book has been banned in one school district, and it's located 20 miles away from my hometown. I'm like, we played you in sports. How come you're banning my book? But the activist librarians there did a very bad thing. They wrote a grant and they wrote a grant to a national nonprofit organization called We Need Diverse Books, which evidently is a subversive organization, and they were awarded, I believe, $5,000 worth of free books shipped to their library. My title was one of 172 titles that their school board president refused, ordered the librarians not to open the boxes and shelve the books because, in his words, who gave them the authority to apply for free books from this subversive organization?
One last question, or shall we move on to the book signing?
And I'm happy to answer your questions in the signing line too. And just miigwech, I so appreciate this opportunity, and thank you for your support with this symposium. It was incredible. Every speaker, every presentation, everything. Really, my honor.
Thank you. I'll just give you a brief logistical note for the book signing. It will be in the first classroom on the left in the hallway. So if you have books and you would like Angeline to sign them, please go ahead and start a queue at the door of that classroom, and then you'll be able to pass through in time. Thank you.